The apartment was quiet and peaceful as Ethan Parker sat at his desk scrolling through emails. The wedding was only 6 days away, and he still needed to finalize the seating arrangements for the reception. Madison was at her bachelorette party across town with her best friends, and he had decided to stay home and handle some last-minute details. His laptop chimed with a notification indicating a new email had arrived from an unknown sender. The subject line read simply, "Check this out." Ethan frowned. He rarely opened emails from unknown senders, but something made him click on this one. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe it was just curiosity. Whatever the reason, he would soon realize that decision would change everything. A video file was attached, and when he clicked play, his heart began to race faster and faster. The camera opened on a dimly lit nightclub. Madison was there, surrounded by her friends, dancing and laughing. But as the video continued, Ethan felt his stomach drop. She was dancing close to a muscular stranger. His hands were on her waist, and she was not pulling away. Instead, she was leaning into him, smiling that smile that Ethan thought belonged only to him. The video showed more things that made his hand shake and his chest feel tight. Madison was drinking heavily, and her behavior was becoming increasingly reckless. She was touching the stranger in ways that crossed every boundary they had ever discussed in their 4-year relationship. They had made promises to each other about respect and faithfulness, and she was breaking those promises right there on the screen. He watched in horror as the video continued for what felt like an eternity. His hands began to tremble, and his breathing became shallow. He rewound the video twice just to make sure he was seeing what he thought he was seeing. Yes, it was definitely Madison. Yes, she was definitely crossing lines they had promised never to cross. He felt numb, as if his body had shut down to protect his mind from the pain. His eyes were wet, but he was too shocked to cry. His brain could not process what he was witnessing. The woman he loved, the woman he was supposed to marry in 6 days, was on this video doing things that shattered his heart into 1,000 pieces. He heard the sound of car tires in the driveway. Madison was coming home. She would be excited to tell him about her evening, her friends, her fun. She would have no idea that everything had changed. She would have no idea that he knew her secret. The video continued to play on his screen, mocking him, taunting him, reminding him that the woman he thought he knew might be someone completely different. Ethan closed the laptop quickly as he heard keys in the lock. His face was pale. His eyes were distant and cold as he heard Madison entering the apartment, calling out his name with excitement and love.
Madison burst through the door with energy radiating from her entire body. Her hair was styled beautifully, and her dress was elegant and expensive. She had spent the evening celebrating with her closest friends, and she could not wait to tell Ethan all about it. She expected to see him smile and hear him ask about every detail. Instead, she found him sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television. His expression was completely unreadable and cold. Madison approached him slowly, feeling confusion wash over her. She reached out to touch his arm, but Ethan pulled away from her. The rejection stung, and she felt her excitement begin to crumble. "What is wrong with you?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light, but her voice wavered slightly. Ethan did not answer. He simply stared ahead as if she were not even there. She sat down next to him and tried again, asking about his day, what he had done, if he had eaten anything. He responded with single-word answers or simple nods. He would not look at her, and he would not explain what had upset him. Madison felt panic beginning to rise in her chest. Something was terribly wrong, and she could feel it in her bones. For 2 hours, she begged him to tell her what was wrong. She asked if he was sick, if something bad had happened at work, if his family was okay. Ethan remained silent and withdrawn. His coldness was cutting her like a knife, and she could not understand why. He had been fine that morning when she left. He had kissed her goodbye and told her to have fun. So what had changed? Finally, Madison stood up from the couch and her voice became stronger, more demanding. "Tell me right now, what is going on, Ethan?" she said. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and tears were beginning to form in her eyes. She watched as he slowly turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was one of pure pain and betrayal. He stood up and walked to his desk. His movements were slow and deliberate, as if each step took all his strength. He opened his laptop and turned it toward her. Without saying a word, he pressed play. Madison watched in absolute horror as the video began to play. She saw herself on that screen. She saw her own face, her own hands, her own body, doing things she would never want Ethan to see. Madison felt the room begin to spin. She fell back onto the couch, unable to support her own weight anymore. The tears came pouring down her face as the reality of what she had done crashed down on her like a tsunami. She had made a terrible mistake, and now the man she loved, the man she was supposed to marry, was looking at her with eyes full of disappointment and heartbreak.
Madison sat on the couch, unable to stop the tears that streamed down her face. Her entire body was shaking as she tried to speak, but words would not come. Ethan stood across the room from her, his arms crossed, his jaw clenched. His eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a pain that was almost unbearable to witness. "How could you do this?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse and broken. She knew he did not expect an answer. He was not asking for information. He was asking because he needed to understand how the woman he loved could hurt him in such a devastating way. Madison opened her mouth to speak, but only sobs came out. "It was just a moment," she finally managed to say, between crying. "It meant nothing. I was drunk, and my friends, they kept pushing me, saying that it was my last night of freedom. They said every bride did things like this." She looked up at him, desperately searching his face for any sign of forgiveness or understanding. "You promised me, Madison," he said, his voice rising. "You looked me in the eye and you promised that we would never do anything to disrespect our relationship. You said that faithfulness meant something to you. You said that trust was the foundation of everything we were building together." He turned away from her, unable to look at her face any longer. "I know," she said, crying harder. "I know what I promised, and I broke that promise. I was weak and stupid, and I let my friends influence me into doing something that I knew was wrong. Even in that moment, Ethan, I could feel that it was wrong, even as it was happening. So why did you continue?" he demanded, turning back to face her. "If you knew it was wrong, why did you keep going? Why did you not stop and think about me? Why did you not think about our wedding? Why did you not think about the vows you were about to make to me?" Madison had no answer because she knew that anything she said would sound like an excuse. She had let peer pressure and insecurity take control of her actions. She had allowed her friends to convince her that what happened in Vegas could stay in Vegas, even though they were not in Vegas. They were right here in their hometown where people knew them, where people would talk. The apartment felt cold and empty, despite both of them being there. The distance between them was more than just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, and it felt impossible to cross. Ethan walked to the bedroom, and Madison heard the door close softly behind him, leaving her alone on the couch with nothing but her regret and her tears. 3 days passed without any real conversation between them. The wedding invitations sat in their places in the church program holders at the venue. Ethan had not canceled anything, but he had not spoken to Madison about whether the wedding would happen. He went to work, came home, and slept in the guest bedroom. Every night, Madison lay awake in their bed, crying silently, wondering if her future was falling apart. On the third night, Madison could not take it anymore. She found Ethan in the kitchen making coffee, and she stood in the doorway, determined to make him listen. "I know what I did was unforgivable," she began, her voice steady despite her breaking heart. "But I am begging you to let me explain what was really happening in my heart.
Ethan turned to face her, his expression guarded and tired. "Go ahead," he said coldly. "My whole life I have struggled with insecurity," she said, voice shaking. "When you asked me to marry you, I was terrified because I felt like I did not deserve someone as good as you. I kept thinking that eventually you would figure out that I was not good enough for you. That night at the bachelorette party, my friends kept telling me that I was lucky and I should take advantage of my last night of freedom, and I started to believe that maybe if I was more wild, more reckless, more exciting, then I would feel like I actually deserved you." "That makes no sense," Ethan said, shaking his head. "You cannot justify cheating by saying you felt insecure. That is not how love works, Madison. That is not how trust works. If you felt insecure, you were supposed to talk to me. You were supposed to tell me what you were feeling so we could work through it together. Instead, you destroyed the one thing that held us together." "I know," she said, crying. "I made a horrible mistake and I will regret it for the rest of my life. But I am asking you not to throw away everything we have built because of one terrible night. I am asking you to forgive me, not because I deserve it, but because our love deserves it." Ethan looked at her long and hard. He could see the genuine remorse in her eyes. He could feel the sincerity in her words. But he could also feel the broken pieces of his heart, and he did not know how to fix something that had been so thoroughly shattered. "I need time," he finally said. "I cannot make this decision right now with everything feeling so raw and painful." Madison nodded, understanding that this was the best she could hope for in this moment. She had broken his trust, and now she would have to live with the consequences of that choice. Every moment he spent wondering if he could truly forgive her was a moment she had earned through her own selfishness. The wedding day arrived and Madison stood in the bride's dressing room looking at herself in the mirror. She was dressed in the beautiful white gown that she had dreamed about since childhood, but she felt no joy. Her eyes were red from weeks of crying, and her heart was heavy with doubt. The wedding was happening only because Ethan had decided that canceling would hurt too many people. But Madison knew that his decision did not mean he had forgiven her. It meant he was honoring his commitments, even though she had not honored hers. As she walked down the aisle, her legs felt like they might give out beneath her. She saw Ethan standing at the altar, looking handsome in his tuxedo, but his expression was closed off, guarded. He looked at her, but his eyes were different than they had been before the video. They held a caution that had not been there before. When they exchanged vows, Madison's voice trembled as she spoke the words, "I promise to love and cherish you." She meant every word, but she could feel the weight of her betrayal between them. And when Ethan spoke his vows, his voice was steady, but there was a hollowness to it that broke her heart all over again. After the ceremony, they danced their first dance as husband and wife, but it felt mechanical, like two people going through the motions of a ritual that had lost its meaning. Madison wanted to scream and cry. Madison wanted to scream and cry and beg him to feel something for her. But she knew that trust was not something that could be rebuilt overnight. It was not something that could be rebuilt by simply getting married on a predetermined date. That night, alone in their hotel room, Madison finally found the courage to ask him directly, "Do you still want to be married to me?" She held her breath, waiting for his answer. Ethan was quiet for a long time. "I am staying because I made a commitment and because I love you," he said finally. "But I have to be honest with you, Madison. I do not know if I will ever be able to look at you the same way again. You hurt me deeply, and every time I think about that video, every time I remember that you were kissing someone else, touching someone else, I feel that pain all over again." Madison nodded, understanding that this was the reality of what she had created. She had damaged something precious and beautiful, and no amount of apologies could undo what had been done. "You were right," she said. "I destroyed your trust, and now I have to rebuild it, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn back what I threw away." Lessons and learning points from this story.
This powerful story teaches us several important lessons about love, relationships, and personal responsibility. The first lesson is that peer pressure is dangerous, especially when it comes from people we consider our closest friends. Madison allowed her friends to influence her into doing something that violated her own values and the commitments she had made to her partner. We must learn to stand firm in our beliefs even when others are pressuring us to act against our better judgment. The second lesson is that insecurity cannot be an excuse for betrayal. Madison blamed her cheating on her insecurity and feeling like she did not deserve Ethan. While it is true that we all struggle with insecurity, we must learn to address those feelings in healthy ways by communicating with our partners, by seeking therapy or counseling, and by working on ourselves, rather than hurting those we love. The right response to insecurity is vulnerability and honesty, not recklessness and betrayal. The third lesson is about trust and how fragile it truly is. Trust takes years to build, but only moments to destroy. Ethan and Madison had spent 4 years building a strong foundation of trust, and Madison destroyed it in one night. This teaches us that we must be vigilant about protecting and honoring the trust that people place in us, because once it's broken, it may never be fully restored.